I just wanted to very briefly explain to you why we're talking about how we think during this week's PowerPoints. I'm introducing this particular set of slides on how we think because it's important to understand the science behind the framework that UDL is modeled after. We often talk about UDL and the different frameworks within UDL, but we don't talk about why we have those frameworks. So this particular PowerPoint will help you explain or help you understand the different networks that we use within our brain, as well as the different parts of our brain that are being tapped into as we go through different tasks. When we're talking about how we think, we're talking about three different brains or three different networks. The first is a recognition network, and this is what tells us what we are seeing. So if we walk into a classroom, we know we are seeing chairs, we are seeing tables, we are seeing a whiteboard. It's purely what we see, what we recognize. The strategic network is how we make sense of what we're seeing. Oftentimes this may be based on background knowledge or prior knowledge that we may already have about a situation. If you were looking at a room full of tables and chairs and a whiteboard, you may know that this is a classroom. However, if I were to bring in a 3-year-old who has no classroom experience or doesn't know what a school is, they may not come to the same conclusion because their strategic network is not fully developed. Next is the affective network, and this is how well you are engaged in that particular picture or whatever it is that you're learning. This has to do more with what your interests are. Sometimes it does play into your background or what your general state of mind is. How engaged are you with the material? So you can see in this slide, this breaks it down a little bit further, but within the three different networks, we're looking at identifying objects, figuring out what information you get from those objects, and then the determination of how long and how carefully you are looking at different objects. As you begin to look at this picture, I want you to just identify the things that you see in the picture. Despite the fact that some of the objects that you may see or may have identified in this picture may not be well lit or maybe just in the side of the photograph, you may have seen things like windows, which is at the far left, or you may have been able to identify that there's a piano in the back right corner because you recognize sheet music. You may have seen the table, the chairs, the pictures, the man with his coat. All of these things are part of your recognition network. In the last slide, I asked you to take a look at what you were seeing and just tell me what was in the picture. This time I want you to take a look at this particular photograph, the exact same photograph, and tell me how old the people are, what historical period this might be from, and how people might be feeling in the picture. This time, instead of just recognizing what you saw, you had to do some deductive reasoning. You had to make some inferences. You couldn't just say there is a chair. You had to know that that particular chair that has the skirt around it isn't from modern times. Or perhaps you had to know that the trench coat the man is wearing may be from the Victorian era. You had to infer how people are feeling or what the reactions are. So this wasn't something where you were able to just look at the information and regurgitate what you were seeing. You had to make sense of it. You had to use your strategic network to help you understand what you were seeing. What you're seeing in these two different pictures are some eye tracking charts. What this does is it gives you a chance to see where eye movements were going when looking at that particular picture that you were just looking at. So if you look at these eye movements, they're from the same person looking at the same image, and that image that you've been looking at is called the unexpected visitor. But each of these two images is different. Like you, the viewer who was looking at those images looked at the image with different goals each time. In the first picture, which is the one on the left, he was instructed to identify the ages of the people in the image. So you can see, if you were to imagine the picture, those three kind of blobs, if you will, on the left side are where the faces were. So he was going back and forth at the faces. On this picture on the right, he was asked to determine what the people were doing before the visitor arrived. So you can see that each new strategy resulted in a different pattern of eye movements. So when you looked at the picture with different goals, you probably looked at different parts of the picture and probably in different orders, and you focused on different elements of the picture. So as I'm asking you questions, you're looking for different parts. Because you use different strategies to reach different goals, you looked at different parts of the picture each time. And this is important because as we pose questions to students, we need to make sure that we are also asking them the questions that help them achieve the goals that we have in mind. In addition, it's important to know that we can have a picture like the one that you just looked at, and depending on how we phrase something or how we ask the question, that impacts which strategic network, or as opposed, if it's the strategic or it's the recognition network, and whether or not the student is going to come to the answer that we are hoping they are going to reach. As we talk about this last network, which is the affective network, I want you to tell me what in particular strikes you about this picture. What is something that you are interested in? So what you see in this picture depends on your interest, your background, your general state of mind. If you are a psychology major, maybe you might look at the expressions on people's faces. Or if you are particularly interested in design or antiques or decoration, you might look at the room's decor. Maybe if you're a parent, you're looking at the children who are seated at the table. Or if you're a musician, you're drawn to the piano. So your background information or your own personal interest also change how you interpret information. So I hope that you're able to see that this exercise shows that all three brain networks are working when you do something as simple as you view an image. And it's important to remember these three networks also come into play when we start talking about universal design for learning. And I hope that you'll see that the recognition, strategic, and affective networks line up perfectly with the different components of UDL and in helping you understand how students are seeing information, understanding information, and whether or not they are engaged with the information.